talking about. All right, now, Chris Lowe, ESPN, one of the best writers you could have in the country. He came up with the 10 most unbreakable records in college football. Now, there are 1 through 10, and it's in order, but it doesn't mean if 5's not more important than 4, whatever. They're all records, some of them very unique. For example, Oklahoma, 47-game win streak. Now, think about this. As good as so many teams have been since then, you could think of USC in the late 60s with O.J. Simpson, or USC in the 70s, or USC in the 2000s, or Nebraska, Florida State, Miami, name them. Alabama, Nick Saban, right? Oklahoma with Stoops. All of these programs at Ohio State, all the Blue Bloods. No one's really come. Nebraska had a 35-game non-losing streak. They had a tie in there back in the early 70s. They tied USC. And then I think it was UCLA that ended that. 47 games in a row from back in that ended back in the late 1950s.
Yeah, and part of these, look, one of the things that the longest win streak ever, that won't ever happen again, because it's really like that
means you're going to have to win 3 consecutive national titles in this day and age.
Yes.
To get to 4, that would be like 45 or 46.
Yeah, or like you've won 2 and then you win your next 5 games or so at the beginning of the next season. But even then, like, we're not going to see undefeated national champions all that often. Now.
Well, there's only, you can have no more than 1 a year now.
Yeah.
You could have had 1 or 3 or, Yeah,
but you were not going to see. There's not going to be there's not going to be a team that ends the year undefeated that's not the national champion. If it is.
Right.
And because the scheduling's different, and because there's more teams, and because they play more games in a year, let's not forget that between 53 and 57, they were only playing 10 games a year. You throw an extra 2 games on there, that's an extra 2 times a year you get to lose. So, they're playing more games. Team, like, the distance between what that Oklahoma team would have been now, and let's just say, I guess, Iowa State in 1957 is a lot smaller than it was then, right? I mean, so if you just took those, like, the same kind of, like, recruiting metrics and all that, like, it's a lot smaller than the teams they would have lost to. So that one's really hard. 236.9 yards rushing a game is probably not going to happen.
Yeah, now let's be careful with that. It's per game. It's not overall yardage, because now everyone's playing 13, 14, 15 so games.
But also, nobody runs the ball that much anymore.
Although Boise State did.
Yeah, I mean, they got close. But, like, again, but if you are also, if you're Boise State and Ashton Jeanty has 200 yards in the third quarter and you're up by 31 points, guess who's not playing?
Yeah.
Ashton Jeanty. That was never the case for Oklahoma State and Barry Sanders, and they were a really good team. But because of the style of football, blowouts weren't really the same.
All right, as good as Jeanty was last year, and Jeanty rushed for 2,601 yards, which was less than Barry Sanders by a little bit. Wasn't much. Garrett, how many yards per game? Knowing what I just said about Ashton Jeanty's numbers, how many yards per game rushing do you think he had?
Oh, God.
If the record is 238.9 with Barry Sanders.
I would say, oh, God, like 17?
No. How many yards per game did he average rushing for Boise State last year?
I was, probably close to 200.
185.
Okay, yeah.
Just less than 186. He played 14 games. Barry Sanders would have done that, I believe, in 13 games. 238.9 yards per carry. All right, the other one. Florida State. They went through a stretch with Bobby Bowden where they were always in the top 5. Not like they didn't have like a bump in the road. For 14 consecutive years, they were in the top 5. Okay. Now, Miami was a problem, or maybe on occasion somebody else. But this is insane. Okay. As good as Saban and Alabama were, 14 consecutive top 5 finishes.
So in those years from 87 to 2000, they only lost either in a random bowl game to Miami, Florida, or like a rando during the year. And between then and 2000, they only lost, I think, 3 total ACC games, maybe 4. So until 2000, they'd been in the ACC and only lost a couple times since 92 or 3. They lost to Virginia that time.
I got them in front of me.
Yeah.
Miami in 87. In 91, lost to the Sugar Bowl to Florida when Florida won the national title in 96. Florida in 97. Lost to Tennessee in 98, who won the national title. And then lost in the Sugar Bowl to Oklahoma for the national title.
And they lost to NC State.
In 88, 92, and 93, it just says 1 loss.
Yeah.
Not sure. I think Nebraska might have been one of those, but it wasn't the one that mattered.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just
so
stupid.
they would lose, like, because he was playing Michigan.
152, 19, and 1.
Yeah, so they were playing like Michigan and all these teams in the non-conference when they were an independent, and that. So the other reason that won't happen is because of he had all these guys for 4 years. And then when he had guys that left early, it was like Dion, Leroy Butler. I think Leroy Butler stayed all 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. So he's got the guys who left early were, top 10 picks overall. And if you weren't a top 10 pick, you weren't leaving early then for Bobby. So he had these guys just for years. The other thing he did, which is impossible to do now, and this is the key, is quarterback sat for 2 years, played for 2 or 3. They might redshirt. So he's got them starting for 2 or 3 years. So sat for 2 years, played for 2 or 3 years. Sat for 2 years, played for 2 and 3 years. That doesn't really happen anymore. And so when he went through Peter Tom Willis to Brad Johnson to Casey Weldon to Charlie Ward to Danny Cannell to Thad Busby to Chris Winkie and then sadly to Chris Ricks. That's when it died. But he went through that series of all these guys had sat and they knew the offense and they came in, they played. And so there was never a learning curve. It was just go out and do it and they would adjust. And so, it
was an incredible run.
He had the same coordinators, all that stuff.
Also, we mentioned most rushing yards per game individually. The 1971 Oklahoma Sooners, 472 yards per game as a team. They ran the ball.
Yeah.
They ran the ball. Jack Mildren was the quarterback from Abilene, Texas. They had 1 loss that year, 35-31 to Nebraska. They were number 2 in the country at the end of the year. Former Florida quarterback John Reeves threw 9 interceptions in a game. 9. Unofficial sack record, Derek Thomas in 1988, 27 in one season. There's the game, Patrick Mahomes, 2000, what year was that? It was 2015, 14 or 15, I don't remember. 819 total yards, including passing and rushing yards. Most punt returns for a touchdown in a game. Antonio Perkins had 3 in one game. 200-yard games in a row, Marcus Allen, USC won the Heisman, 5. The longest winning streak for unranked teams, Saban did not get upset. That's what made the thing last year with DeBoer. Vanderbilt beat him a couple of 100 consecutive wins without farting or without burping or without having somebody upset you. That is consistency, and that's why they were so good for as long as they were.
Yeah.
100.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the thing about when Vanderbilt beat them last year. I was like, okay, when was the last time they lost to somebody that would have been truly a shock? Yeah, they would lose to Georgia, or they might lose to LSU, or they might lose to somebody else, but they did not lose a game. That's kind of in that same realm of when Florida State had that great run. They lost to either eventually the national champion or somebody that was in the mix.
When they lost to A&M for the first time, guess who was the quarterback? The Heisman
Johnny
Trophy
Manziel.
winner. So it wasn't like, oh, you lost, who beat you? The guy who won the Heisman Trophy.
I want to go over, and I know we have Kramer Robertson, but I'm going to do this because Paul in Florida State, I'm going to come up with this is that stretch. I want to go through this. You talk about consistency. In 87, they went 11-2. 87, they went 11-2. They had losses to Miami, and then also, of course, they had losses in 2000 that capped all this off against Oklahoma. In 87, they lost 26-25 to Miami. In 88, they were beaten badly. I think this might have been an opening game against Miami, like 31-0. It was bad. They lost that game. In 89, they got off to a bad start. They lost to Southern Miss and then Clemson and then got on a run.
But by the way, would you like to know who the quarterback for Southern Miss was?
Yeah, Brett Favre.
That was Brett Favre.
Yeah.
So, again, when people are like, oh, Southern Miss. Yeah, Favre holds Southern Miss.
That was their Diego Pavia in a lot of different ways. In 1990, they lost to Miami and then eventually fifth-ranked Auburn. In 1991, one of those field goals that went off to the right to Miami, lost that game 17-16. That happened quite a bit. In 1992, who was their loss? Miami. They actually lost a game. They lost to, was it Miami, and then went on to beat Nebraska to win the national title? Was that 92, Paul?
93.
93.
In 93, their loss was to Notre Dame. So
yeah, they lost 31-20. Lost to Notre Dame. You're right.
Boston College came out the next week and beat an overconfident Notre Dame team that probably nowadays would have been a national championship game as opposed to FSU.
94, they lost to Miami and then lost. I had a tie against the Gators. 95.
Choking the doke.
They got they even beat Miami that year. Had a great run in 95, but they lost to Virginia, who was ranked in the top 25, 33-28. In 1996, this is the year they could have won another national title, as could have Nebraska, but they lost to UT. Nebraska did. Let's see. They were 11-1. Who beat them, Paul, that year in 96? Was it Tennessee? No, Tennessee. That would have
96 would have
They beat Miami.
Well, that was they lost.
Florida beat them.
Florida beat them in the
they beat them 24-21. 97, they hammered Miami 47-0. Lost to Florida 32-29.
Miami was on probation.
98, they lost to North Carolina State 24-7. In a team that eventually Tennessee won the national title that year and beat Florida State. Tennessee won that game. In 1999, this is the next to the last year.
Didn't lose.
They won it all.
Didn't lose.
David Warren, a good friend of mine, played at Florida State, played at John Tyler High School. And then 2000, they were rolling along, lost twice, and then lost to Oklahoma, who came out of nowhere with Josh Heupel, Bob Stoops and company, 13-2. That's a hell of a run, man. That is an amazing run. When we come back, he